Topic I have this morning is following the rationale. And this has to do with men. And so, you know, the men here, are thinking, wives, really listen close. I don't know. But this is about how we as men tend to think, how we tend to function. And so, I found this topic fairly challenging of actually putting together, okay, how do I process life? How do I sort through things? But a couple of questions. Are men and women different? How many people here agree that they're different? Wives, how many of you, I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands in this one, have ever looked at your husband and said, this guy is out to lunch? I mean, he's somewhere, I think, in the same universe, but I'm not sure where. Or perhaps men, they're sitting there scratching their heads saying, whew, I'm lost. Where did this come from? How am I supposed to figure her out? Maybe you haven't, but I know for me, I've been there. Are men and women different? Yes, they are. There's differences in biology and function that are being challenged in today's culture. Just read the newspaper, listen to the discussions, and you're going to find that there's a significant shift we're undergoing, or this nation or the world is undergoing at this moment. The argument is that differences between male and female are cultural and not biological. Gender is fluid. We live in a world that argues everything is right and nothing is wrong. At least that is until you disagree with them. Then you'll discover very quickly they do not believe that. They do have absolutes they believe. And you'll find it out when you disagree. We live in an age of gender theory, of critical theory, queer theory. The theories go on and on. Where being binary, male or female, is bad, and gender is determined by how I feel, not by how I was biologically created. I have a couple accounts here, some articles that I have pulled up. The first is titled Two Minds. And the one study here that was done or written by Bruce Goldman from Stanford Medical Center in the college there. And what they're saying is that studies, at least in their argument and their studies, are showing that, and one of the things to remember, this does involve animals. But what they're saying in this, and it also involves and is drawn over into human beings as well. And a significant portion of this, it's kind of in between, where they're studying both. But they're noticing or learning that the circuitry involved within the male and female brain is, they would say, developmentally hardwired. And they go on to say that at the time, this is not a universally popular idea. The neuroscience community had largely considered any observed sex-associated differences in cognition and behavior in humans to be due to the effects of cultural influences. Animal researchers, for their part, seldom even bother to use female rodents in their experiments, figuring that the cyclical variations in their reproductive hormones would introduce confounding variability in the search for fundamental neurological insights. And the other issue is that they really grapple with is some researchers have grappled with charges of neurosexism, falling prey to stereotypes or being too quick to interpret human sex differences as biological rather than cultural, okay? Neurosexism is the accusation that people say differences between male and female are biological, not cultural. They're accused of being sexist. Because the popular argument today is that differences are cultural. That in reality there is no difference between male and female, it's just culture develops it. But they go on to say that there is too much data pointing to the biological basis of sex-based cognitive differences to ignore. For one thing, animal research findings resonate with sex-based differences ascribed to people. And remember, this is coming from an evolutionary viewpoint. But yet, they do find similarities between male and female and animals in function, as well as, at least biologically, as what they do within human beings. And some of that is because living beings, whether animal or human, do share a major portion of DNA. Because an animal cell takes the same proteins, etc., that a human cell does. And so there is some very close similarities. And the findings continue to accrue. And they go on with study of some rhesus monkeys, of showing that male monkeys wanted to play with boy toys more than girl toys, etc. Whatever that means. Anyway, a much more recent study established that boys and girls 9 to 17 months old, an age when children show few, if any, signs of recognizing either their own or another child's sex, nonetheless show marked differences in their preferences for stereotypical male versus stereotypical female toys. And they go into behavioral differences and just continuing down, and they say this is continuing to accumulate. The neuroscience literature shows that the human brain is a sex-type organ with distinct anatomical differences in neural structures and accompanying physiological differences in function. And so what they're saying, there is distinct differences between a male brain and a female brain. And we will clarify some of this as we go on. Now I have another article. Bad Science in the Unisex Brain. And this is about a book that was written in, I believe it's 2019. It's called The Gendered Brain. And what you're going to find here is a different viewpoint, and that's why I chose it. Neurosexism. The history of sex difference research is rife with innumeracy, misinterpretations, publication bias, weak statistical power, inadequate controls, and worse. This lady goes on to say and argue that there is no difference between genders when it comes to biological differences. She goes on to say the history of bias is, her central message is that a gendered world will produce a gendered brain. Okay, you hear what she's saying. What produces gender differences in human beings? A gendered world. So in other words, if we believe a boy is a boy and we dress him in blue, that's what makes him a boy. If we believe she is a girl and we dress her in pink, that's what makes her a girl. And so that is the other side of the argument. She goes on to say the hunt for proof of women's inferiority. Okay, do you notice the shift? Is it about biological differences now? It's not. The argument has to do with inferiority or inequality, which we don't argue. Men and women are created equal. It's not an issue of inferiority. It's an issue of biological differences. Has more recently elided into the hunt for proof of male-female complementarity. So this line goes, women are not really less intelligent than men, just different, in a way that happens to coincide with the biblical teachings and the status quo of gender roles. Thus, women's brains are said to be wired for empathy and intuition, whereas male brains are supposed to be optimized for reason and action. Okay, this woman has an issue. And that is, she has an issue with God's design. God's rule, structures of authority, as well as his design for those rules. Cultural paths. So if it's not brain hardwiring, how do we explain the often stark differences between behavior and interest between men and women? And here's where she gets into the thesis of the different things that she says are the basis for this and how it is wrong. Now, she does draw on some things that are true. Young children are distinctly different. Let me start over. When you study young children, there is little differences or limited differences between male and female. When you see the changes really occurring and really hitting is when the children enter puberty, and when the hormones begin to really kick in, is when you see the distinctions really develop more so. And so she is touching on that, and that within it is part of an accuracy. But she rejects every foundation that has been established scientifically and biologically. And we will address that more. In a book here titled Gender Ideology by Sharon James, What Christians Need to Know, and this is speaking into the critical theory that is really we're hearing a lot of today, which would be include Black Lives Matter. Just some of those different things are all parts of critical theory. And she says this, and this has to do with what they call gender dysphoria. And what gender dysphoria is basically a boy thinking he's a girl or a girl thinking she's a boy, which is actually, when you look at young children, they don't really make a whole lot of differences. I remember being dressed up as a girl, and I thought it was pretty neat. I had 3 sisters. I was the only boy. We have pictures of it. Today, forget it. I mean, not a chance. They might be able to over my dead body, but anyway, you get what I'm saying. There is a distinct transition that does occur as they mature. These professionals are using the myth that people are born transgender to justify engaging in a massive, uncontrolled, and unconsented experimentation on children who have a psychological condition that would otherwise resolve after puberty in the vast majority of cases. Today's institutions that promote transition affirmation are pushing children to impersonate the opposite sex, sending many of them down the path of puberty blockers, sterilization, the removal of healthy body parts, and untold physiological damage. These harms constitute nothing less than institutionalized child abuse. And she goes on to, this individual goes on to say, sound ethics demand an end. Now, what I am saying is, this is the world that we're living in. And so when we look at topics like we're looking at this morning, it is good to hear them because of just the onslaught of other information that is out there. Man today has rejected absolutes. He indeed has. Are men and women different? Yes, they are. Why do you think they're different? God made them different. You sure? Yes, I'm sure. What makes them different? Now that's a loaded question, isn't it? God's design, you're right. But that's too easy, isn't it? But it isn't. It's a whole lot easier to believe that than a lot of the convoluted theories that are floating around out there today. But continuing into Here's something I think that's important for us to remember. And this is what humanity is grappling with. Human biological factors and mental spiritual dimensions are interdependent. Okay, you follow what I'm saying with that? Our physiology, our physical bodies are interdependent with our spiritual nature. They are woven together. We know they affect each other, but we cannot explain or understand how they correlate together, how they work together. It is impossible to explain how known or observed biological functions and our immaterial spiritual dimension interact. And I'm developing this because one of the things as we look at this is, and especially in today's world, is the emphasis of the physical aspect of man to the neglect of the spiritual. And we will get into that a little more later. Secondly, every strength has an equal weakness. And especially when we look at roles and how God designed men to fill their role and how God designed women to fill their role, the strengths that enable them to fulfill their role are detrimental when it enters into other realms, especially when you look at the interwovenness of a marriage, of man and woman working together in a marriage. What makes a man capable or enables him to better fill his role can tend to be detrimental when it comes to relationships or within the operation and function of the home. The same thing for a woman. What enables her to be a mother, when it comes to, let's say, relating to the role of a man or the world that he works in, it becomes detrimental. It clouds things. And so every strength, and you'll find this, every strength, I think I can say always has an equal weakness. Understanding the intent. I'm getting into the intent of this topic. And there's some foundational assumptions that I am assuming here that we're not going to really expand on much, but I felt they should be here in order to keep the topic in line. The reality is there's things going to be missed that should be in, and probably some things said that maybe wouldn't need to be there, but I'm human. But the reality is that's where we do come back to some foundational assumptions. First and foremost is a couple that is dedicated to serving God. And again, as we looked at Ephesians chapter 5 last night, looking at that context of a wife who is submitted to her Lord, serving her Lord, and a husband who is submitted to his Lord, serving his wife, that they're serving each other. A husband who recognizes he is under authority. He intentionally tries to love his wife as Christ loved his church. He values her highly and cares for her. He provides for her the best he can and does whatever he can to lighten her load. He leads out spiritually and is active in child training. He willingly helps around the house. That's just a general condensed. These are some foundational assumptions. As for the wife, a wife who is submitted to Christ and recognizes her husband's authority is given to him by God. She honors him by seeking his advice and speaking well about him to the children. She respects him by striving to abide by the guidelines and etc. that they have agreed to, and by not venting her frustrations about him to the children. She respects him and does not tolerate any form of disrespect. And secondly, there are some concerns that I have with this topic. And first and foremost is the information will be misused. What we're discussing here is not meant to be used to manipulate or belittle a spouse. Differences in design do not change the truth that we are equal. A husband and wife are equal in personhood. but they fill different roles, and God has designed them accordingly. Another thing that I want to make certain is known, that this information cannot be used to excuse wrong behaviors or to dismiss personal responsibilities. We're simply looking at, this is how we are. One, so a wife can better understand how to relate to her husband. And the next topic is so a husband can better understand his wife. And the goal is increased unity. A second thing is that the assumption that one size fits all. There are certain biological absolutes. There is male, there is female. And this cannot be excused as cultural. It is absolute. The next thing to remember is that as we look at this, we are looking at biological tendencies. In the study of man and woman, in the study of brain function, etc., especially, you are looking at what they have noticed as is called empirical data, and that is what it can be observed. Some also includes what has been observed within the study, MRIs of the brain, etc. So there are biological tendencies, and that's what a portion of these differences are looking at, is what in a large group of people, this is what tends to be predominant. There is variation. There will be significant variation in individual genders, male and female is what I'm talking about, due to varying levels of hormones, personalities, giftings, etc. There will be differences. Prior circumstances, home life, health, and disabilities will produce variance as well. We live in a fallen world with all aspects having been and are still being distorted by the fall. There will be variation. So you can't say all men are size 10 and all women are size 8. There will be variation. But what you will find is there does tend to be certain tendencies that are found with males that are not found in females, vice versa. So, understanding your husband. I think it's important for us to recognize that we are different by design. It didn't just happen, it's designed. Genesis chapter 2, starting at verse 18. And the Lord said, It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helpmeet for him. And out of the ground the Lord formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. And Adam gave names to all cattle, and to the fowl of the air, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not a helpmeet found for him. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs, and closed up the flesh thereof. And the rib which the Lord had taken from man made he a woman, and brought her unto man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. God created men and women with distinct physiological, biological, and hormonal differences. That is absolute. And we'll look briefly at how absolute that is. Just a question. What do y'all think? Can a man change his sex into a woman? What do you think? No, he cannot. Are you sure? He can try, but he cannot. Let's consider just briefly chromosomes. And what you're seeing here is a chromosome. And the crossed arms are the links that are in between the come on here. Are the links that are right here that connect the DNA strands. That's chromosomes. Here, humans have 23 pairs, which is a total of 46 chromosomes. Chromosomes are the backbone of DNA. The XY chromosome set determines the sex of the baby. Males have XY chromosomes and females have XX. It is impossible to change the sex of an individual. This happens at conception. The sex of the baby is determined at the point of conception. Now, the thing to note with this DNA is in every human cell in the body. Every human cell will have these 23 pairs of chromosomes. It's in the DNA. It is absolute. It cannot be changed. So this means the rejection of gender means one must reject scientific and biological absolutes as well. So when a person says gender is cultural, there is no such thing as biological gender, they have rejected biology and science. They therefore can never argue anything based upon science if they're going to be consistent. We ironically have heard incredible amounts of arguments in the last year based on science. The truth of the matter is, based upon their worldview, they cannot argue from the basis of biology or science because they reject it when it comes to gender. Let's look briefly at some of the differences. There's quite a few, but I picked out basically chromosomes and the hormonal systems. And the limbic system, as you can see, is the system within the brain here. This is right in here would be the limbic system. So it is the core part of the brain. Here's a definition of the limbic system. The limbic system is regarded as an integral system where relating information to emotions, forming motivations of behavior, regulating autonomous and endocrine function, and consolidating memories occur. Now, autonomous would be the nervous system, your heart, all those different things that continue operating in the background without you giving any thought to them. But we're primarily going to focus on the hormonal systems, just briefly. Now, with this is something I want to emphasize, is that it is important to remember the brain is only an organ. Let me ask a question. Is pornography a moral problem or a brain problem? Moral problem? I hear some say both. That can possibly be, but we do have to be careful. When we say something becomes a brain problem, have we taken morality out of it? And let me illustrate. And this has to do with the Conqueror series. Sexual bondage is not primarily a moral problem, though it does have moral implications. It is primarily a brain problem. And I will expand on this. Secondly, they say trying to treat a brain problem with a moral solution only tightens the noose of bondage. In other words, they're contradicting themselves. If it's not a moral problem, is there anything to get excited about? What do we do that doesn't have moral implications? As a human being, everything we do has moral implications. But that doesn't make it a moral problem. It tells him his righteousness is not based on the cross, but on his works. So if it's a moral problem, and he sees it as a moral problem, it's works-based. If he sees it as a brain problem, then his righteousness is based on the cross. That's what they're saying. But now let's consider some things with this. In the brain is an organ. It is an organ. We have to remember that because that defines its function. Now, what is complicating with the brain is that it is also the control center of the physical body. In other words, it is essential for the function of the physical body. This means that it is the channel through which man's spiritual nature is revealed. So brain problems can reduce physical functionality. They can reduce a person's ability to function as a Christian. It can. That's reality. But the thing of here within the argument of the Conquer series of arguing that moral pornography, sexual sin is a brain problem, there is a degree of now they're looking at empirical data. Think of something. If it is an organ, that means if you practice certain things, it will develop accordingly. So if a person makes choices and repeats those choices, it is natural to understand that neurological pathways will develop in the brain. It becomes, and I think this would actually describe the physical dimension of a habit. Whereas we make a choice and we practice that choice, we develop, the brain builds neurological pathways that we begin to do those things without giving thought to it. It's a habit. Now, does that make the pornography not a moral problem? It does not. Does that habit reduce my responsibilities? It does not. As I said, the brain is the channel through which man's spiritual nature is revealed because it controls the body. It is the center of man's mental capabilities. And studies have shown that functionality. But we must remember it is absolutely important, essential, to begin with the brain as an organ. Because that reduces it to a physical dimension of the body and allows us to acknowledge and say there is a spiritual dimension of man. And that's where we go back to that thought of we do not understand how the physical, the physical, biological body interacts with the spiritual dimension of man. It actually has to happen somewhere. It's interwoven. And God created man specifically to function in this dimension. And just because I practice something, it becomes a habit, does not reduce or change its moral nature. It does not reduce it to purely a physical problem. It remains a moral problem. And to see it as a moral problem is essential to breaking it. It's essential to overcoming. But again, there are distinct physical problems with the brain that reduce functionality. And God is gracious in that we're only accountable to the level to which we can function. And we can only function at a certain level. That's the level God holds us accountable. So again, the brain is only an organ. Today, especially like if you would look at the Conqueror series, you're going to find an emphasis of the brain's the problem, the brain's the problem, the brain's the problem. And my thought to that is, well, then why do you even have a Conqueror series? If it's not a moral problem, there's nothing wrong with all this sexual stuff that you're fighting to address. You're addressing it because it's a moral problem. Don't confuse it. We are physical bodies we have physical bodies that are intertwined with our spiritual dimensions. Let's look briefly at men. I like this picture. I think it captures it well. And this is a picture of, at that time, what were considered to be the 4 strongest men in the world. And the third guy over there has a t-shirt, strong and pretty. Now, I'm not sure. You women do not see any beauty in that, I can rest assured. But, okay, what we're looking at primarily the endocrine system. And what we're looking at here is testosterone. In men have a 10 to 15 times higher level of testosterone than women. And the interesting thing to note is that studies have noted increase the levels and you increase the aggressiveness, and less stimulation is needed to provoke action. So raise the levels, the more aggressive a man becomes. Due to these higher levels of testosterone, men tend to be more reactive, quicker to act, or quicker to make decisions. They also will tend to be more dominant, more assertive, competitive, and controlling. Ladies, do you agree with that? Are men competitive? Just watch, we have 5 boys. They're competitive. One of the things to note within men is that they have a larger amygdala, which is a portion of the brain within the limbic system, and larger preoptic areas. This differences combined with testosterone may provide a biological basis for why men generally take more risk, bond less, and are prone to wandering. Now note, this is written from a Christian perspective. And so that's why the language is as it is. This is actually taken from the book Recovering Biblical Manhood by John Piper. A lot of these ideas, well, some of the ideas are, I pulled them from a number of sources. Now let's consider women. Women's dominant hormone would be estrogen. Their estrogen levels are 8 to 10 times higher than men. Now, something interesting to note with this is increase the level of estrogen and the very opposite effects occur as compared to testosterone. The higher the level of estrogen, the less reactive a woman is. It takes far more stimulation to provoke the same response. And so estrogen tends to work as a sedative. The higher the level of estrogen also makes a woman more prone to depression. They see, have noticed in studies, the higher the levels, the more chances there are of this individual becoming depressed. Also, one of the things they're noting that with increasing estrogen levels, since it is more of a sedative, they tend to be more patient with children, and also within that, they tend to have a stronger maternal bond, which makes a woman more likely to die trying to save a child. Notice again, these are not absolutes. These are just general observations. Now, due to the fact that they have a smaller amygdala and preoptic area, they will tend to have better memory, experience more bonding and closer bonds, and be more maternal. So that is just, when you look at primarily the hormones that dominate each sex, here is how it tends to affect. Now the interesting thing is, give a woman more testosterone and she'll start looking like this. In other words, when they increase testosterone levels in a woman, what they'll find is more aggression, behaviors that tend to become more like men. And this, again, as I was saying, is general observations in studies and as they have done various testing, that kind of a thing. Another thing is women have a better sensory system. They tend to be better at hearing, at smell, at touch, taste, and sight. They are naturally more observant. They are able to see better slight differences in color. They can see slight flushing of a child better than a man can. And they are better at reading facial expressions. I don't know if you men have ever thought about that. I have. They're better at reading facial expression. They're better at reading body language. Now this one is missing in your notes, and I'm not sure why. And that has to do with the corpus callosum. It is a nerve bundle connecting the brain hemispheres. Women's are significantly larger than men, and the question becomes, how does this then affect a woman? It enables the brain hemispheres to work more closely together. This means faster data transfer. It means as well that women better integrate more sensory and stored memory information. So you have a broader integration of information that is accessed. This helps them develop a more complete analysis and evaluation of a situation. A woman's take of a situation will be totally different than a man's take of the same situation. This improved integration enables a woman to multitask and is believed to play a part in something we call woman's intuition. And here is just an excerpt drawn from Recovering Biblical Manhood. It has been suggested as an example that if a male and female were both interviewing a potential new employee, the male might become very focused and engrossed in his line of questioning and the accuracy or clarity of responses, while the female would not only process the conversation, but also the mannerisms, facial expressions, facial colors, dress, hygiene, and many other clues to personality and the temperament. The woman would come away from the same 1-hour interview with a much more in-depth and complete assessment of the candidate and his suitability for the job. And they go on to say this might be in fact what for years has been called women's intuition. And he spoke about a situation where him and his wife had gone to the doctor. The child was sitting on the doctor's table, and suddenly his wife lunged for the child before he realized what was happening. She had noticed that apparently the child was beginning to lose its balance and started to fall before he saw anything. And she was there to catch him. He would not have made it. And he kind of used that illustration of how they tend to read and process information faster. One of the things that comes with this is the fact that due to this, women tend to be better communicators and have better memories. The downside is they can be more quickly distracted and, as I said before, more susceptible to depression. Now, the corpus callosum in men. The smaller size results in a more lateralized brain. Men think categorically. They're generally more single-minded, focused, less distractible, and possibly less socially aware. Men handle stress better due to this, but this ability frequently causes an early death. Men tend to be better with visual-spatial skills and math. This includes foresight, problem-solving, and coordination. Visual-spatial skills are of great importance for success in solving many tasks in everyday life. For instance, using a map to guide you through an unfamiliar city, merging into high-speed traffic, and orienting yourself in your environment, packing a box, putting something together, or turning a pile of lumber into a shed. That is visual spatial skills. They will tend to struggle more with multitasking, with communication, and seeing the bigger picture. Moving into difference in function. God made us different on purpose. We have to remember that. God made us different on purpose. Differences are not the result of the fall. It is important to remember. The fall only complicates the differences. They existed before the fall. Secondly, it says in Genesis 2 there that it's not good for man to be alone. And one of the things I want to say with this is not to be interpreted derogatorily, either against men or against women. I've heard it many times used to make some arguments that to me are questionable. This is not about incompleteness of personhood. In other words, when God said it's not good for man to be alone, he's not talking about his personhood, himself as an individual. The context and a proper understanding of Genesis indicates God's plan for creation was incomplete if man is alone. If you study the context and how God created the world and what he knew it would be, man being alone would leave his creation incomplete. Because if he is created equal in personhood with his wife, therefore this aloneness does not have anything to do with him as a person. with him as an individual. It has to do with God's plan for his creation and what he saw ahead in the future. Secondly, or thirdly, is our differences are suited to our roles. The differences between men and women are chiefly focused on their wider callings within the world, rather than upon their direct relationships with each other. Men and women were created for distinctly different purposes. Men have the role of naming, taming, and ruling creation. Women have the role of mothering and homemaking. God created them to fill their roles, not so much as to do with their direct relationship with each other. And that's where we see the struggles enter in. As the differences in the role, the differences in how God made us, combined with the fall and our self-centeredness, make these differences a problem. Men and women are created for different primary purposes. These purposes, when pursued in unity and with mutual support, can reflect God's own form of creative role in the world. Differences are absolutely essential for marital functionality. What would the home be like if a man was like his wife? Or a wife was like her husband? In other words, there'd be no differences. What would a home be like? Well, first of all, you wouldn't have a home. Because who would be the mom? If men and women were alike. We see the problem we have today when gender is ignored. The differences between men and women aren't merely incidental, but integral to our purpose. They're also deeply meaningful, relating to God's own fundamental patterns of operation. God created us to be male and female, and thereby to reflect his own creative role in his world. He has a distinct purpose. We're a reflection of him in the world that we live. Differences are essential in that they teach us submission and servanthood. They broaden our world and enlarge our experience. Another thing to remember is beauty is dependent on differences and contrast. If women were like men or men were like women, our world probably would not exist. At a minimum, it would be chaotic and dysfunctional. Now, let's take a look at a couple pictures. If you had to pick between the three pictures, which one was the most beautiful? The second one? Each one has a sense of beauty, does it not? But think of it. Where you have the contrast, doesn't it add dimensions to it? That lack in something, imagine it's entirely purple. Would that be beautiful? Not as much. I mean, I look at that, and to me, that's awe-inspiring. Just the mass array of colors makes a beautiful scene. And beauty is found in the blending of our differences and the harmonizing of those differences into a united purpose. All three pictures are beautiful. Don't get me wrong. But we tend to think beauty is found in everything being the same. And it actually is not. Because that doesn't require harmony. Beauty in the eyes of God is when all our differences are combined together to make a scene. Abounding in color, abounding in differences, but majestic in its harmony. Secondly, men and women resolve problems differently. How many people here have thought of that? Wives, does your husband resolve a problem different than you do? Husbands, does your wife resolve a problem different than you do? You see, women talk through a problem, and it usually kind of goes like this. And what I mean by that is they throw it all out there. They throw it all out there, but while they're throwing it, as they're doing this, they're sorting through it. This will include emotions, strong statements, and seemingly disconnected or fragmentary processes or dialogue. It's just, whoosh, here it is. Sometimes the current situation has little to do with the problem. It may have several problems woven together, but within all of this, it will be distinctly personal. Men tend to get quiet and withdraw. Again, remember, I'm not saying these are absolutes, but these are tendencies. Men tend to need time to think through a problem before they can talk about it. The more personal and hurtful the situation, the more time it will take. He is trying to figure out what just happened. It takes time to sort through what he is thinking and to identify what he is feeling. He may be angry, deeply hurt, feeling misunderstood, and he may not want to say the wrong thing. Besides, he's got to sort through all of this stuff. I mean, what is it? Or am I missing something? Recently, I had an individual here, and we were discussing this, and I had a big handful of paper clips. And as we were talking, I threw it at him. He was surprised. But my point was, this is how things tend to come. You need to be ready for it. You need to take the time to sort through it. Men tend to think analytically. And what this means is they divide a complex whole into its part or elements. Frank comes home from work. He asks Jan how her day was. They sit down for supper. Various topics are discussed through the course of the meal. After supper, he grabs his computer and does some finances, shopping, checks emails, etc. He notices that Jan keeps glancing at him, but he doesn't give it a thought. Jan suddenly says, "I hate computers." "You're always on the computer." Frank is taken off guard, and he kind of looks at her blankly. And he says, "Wait a minute here. Okay, let me think. How much time did I spend on the computer this evening? Last week?" He starts calculating. Updated finances, checked emails, did a little research. There's about 15, 20 minutes yesterday. That held out about the same. For the last week, 15 to 20 minutes a day. You know, an evening is from 6 to 10. So that means there's 240 minutes in an evening, and I was only on the computer for 20 minutes. There's a lot of evening left. I didn't spend that much time on my computer. Or maybe it happens when he only checked the emails for about 3 minutes. His response is, "No, I don't know what the big fuss is about. You know, I only spend about 20 minutes a day on average on the computer, and for your information, here's what I was doing." Jan's reply is, "You don't understand. You don't get it. You're so unobservant." She emits a deep sigh, rolls her eyes, and is quiet. Frank sits there confused, trying to figure out what he's supposed to get and wondering what he missed. He turns away and meanders to his recliner and sits there absently staring out the window, trying to figure out what just happened. Where did this come from? 15 minutes pass by. He is totally unaware that World War III has been raging in the next room for several minutes. Jan is in the depths of despair. Her world seems lonely and dark. She wonders if their marriage will survive. How can he be so clueless? He just doesn't get it. Didn't he notice something was bothering her last night? She hears the children fighting in the next room and wonders when he will do something about it. Finally, when she can't stand the commotion anymore, she asks, "Aren't you going to do something about it?" "Do what?" he wonders. Jan's jaw hits the floor and she is momentarily speechless. She replies, "What is wrong with you? What a fine father you are. I believe someone could come in here and kill me and the children and you would never even notice it. Matter of fact, you probably wouldn't even care or miss us. You don't love me at all. I don't know why you married me in the first place." Life seems dark and hopeless. Now Frank is really confused. How did we get from computers to bad comparing to murder to not loving Jan to not missing or caring if something happened to his family? And I know this is an allegory. Okay, I just wrote it up to try to think about how things can tend to go and how men tend to think analytically. Now, here is a $20 bill. We tend to think factually. And the fact is, that's a $20 bill, right? And another fact might be is that Ben has a lot more of these than I do. And so, within, as we look at facts, facts are important for planning, problem solving, subduing, conquering, and providing. But what this means is you take life as they are, as it is comes, as it's done, or by what is said. Within this context, the facts are she doesn't like computers. She feels I spend too much time on it. The fact is she frequently uses it for shopping or social media. Does she hate computers? Another fact, at least in my mind, is that I don't spend a lot of time on the computer, as for Frank. So there are facts. And you can broaden this in many ways. Next is he tends to think categorically, or tunnel vision. Tunnel vision is the ability to zero in on something, cut out all distraction. This is critical for solving intense, complicated, or confusing problems. It helps men see things that general observation cannot see. It is an important gift that enables man to fulfill God's command to subdue the earth. It is a key element of discernment as well. It is the ability to take something and break it down into its individual components and analyze each individually. It is an important part of planning ahead, as well as identifying and avoiding deception. Tunnel vision enables a person to observe small details, solve complex problems, understand difficult theological issues, discovering amazing processes, and come up with great inventions, but it frequently misses the obvious. Tunnel vision hinders general observation and makes it more difficult for men to see the big picture, especially within relationships. I have a question for you. If Vonda tells me to go get a pack of crackers, which pack will I pick? Maybe. What if the only cracker we have we both like? And how many women here get frustrated with their husband's lack of observation? Can you get the crackers? Crackers. Where are the crackers? Crackers. They're not here. They're right in front of your nose. Has that ever happened? Yes. Anyway, and one of the things I thought of within this is I tend to get a picture of what I'm looking for. If I'm looking for townhouse, I don't care what cracker's in there. I'm not going to see it. If I'm looking for a pack of crackers, the closet could be full of crackers and I'm going to miss it. You know, okay. One of the things within tunnel vision is that tendency to zero in on something and define things down, and we miss the obvious. And so within categorical or tunnel vision, that's what happens. We tend to think objectively and logically. And this is focused on the facts. Facts will tend to center on external things like what is seen. Reasoning will be the focus, not what is felt or thought. Objectivity and logic are essential for cutting down a tree. Ben and I cut down a big oak several weeks ago. How did we do it? We walked around the tree. Well, Ben did. I watched. I had the privilege of splitting it. Should have switched. No, he's better at felling trees. We looked at the tree and determined by the mass of the tree which way the tree should fall. And so based upon those facts and that information, he did a wedge cut a certain way, also based upon the rottenness of the trunk at the base. He approached it certain ways, and the tree fell as it should have. So within that, objectivity and logic are essential in doing that safely. Obviously, things don't always work as they plan. This approach can be problematic since feelings are usually subjective, not objective, and relationships at times, many times, defy logic. How many men have heard, know or realize your wife is upset about something, but she doesn't know why. Or something's bothering her. Well, what's bothering you? I don't know. How am I supposed to know? Relationships, many times, defy logic. They take more than logic. There are weaknesses in this approach. Analytical thinking tends to miss people. The analytical mindset can reduce people to inanimate objects. They're just parts in a picture, not people with feelings or desires. The combination of a focus on facts, tunnel vision, being objective, and following logic tends to miss how a person might feel or what they might be experiencing or thinking. There's some strength. Analytical thinking is essential in discernment. I'm not saying that women are not discerning, don't get me wrong. But we do see in 1 Timothy 2, and this has been a text that has been debated, is that Eve was deceived, but Adam was not. Adam knew distinctly what was happening. Eve was deceived in it. And this is not pointing fingers one way or the other. I would actually point the finger at Adam and his failed responsibility. It looks beyond their subjective emotions and zeroes in on objective facts. Eve saw that the tree was desired. It was desirable. It was beautiful. And she took and ate. This enables the individual to logically analyze the facts and understand or resolve the situation with limited emotional interference. It aids in avoiding deception. The ability to take something apart and categorize the various elements involved enables the person to analyze each part and sort through truth, or sort truth from error. Also, men usually need space to think and time to process. In other words, okay, this has all been dumped out, and for a man, he's got to sort through this all. He's got to take a look here and kind of begin to sort things out and sort through it and identify what is happening, what is going on. It takes time to process this. Men think internally. That's why a man can make a decision that the wife has no clue he's making, and he may have thought about it for weeks. We think internally. It takes time to identify what I'm feeling and put all those feelings in their proper place. And again, the more intense and personal and hurtful the situation, the more time it takes to sort through it. What was I thinking? What was I feeling? What did I do? What did I say? What is it I did? Also, men communicate differently. One of the things within this, as is noted, women are generally better at communicating. In other words, they have a larger pool of data they tend to have together as they communicate. Men need to think things through more so and communicate, but then it is very condensed. Women tend to communicate indirectly. I don't know if you've noticed, but especially the difference in men and boys is boys Say it how it is, fight it out, cool down, and go on like nothing happened. Okay, they've processed, we're good to go. But women tend to communicate more indirectly. Now, I'm not saying men don't. I'm saying these are tendencies. It's not absolutes. A man can describe an entire weekend with 1 to 3 words. When our oldest son was dating, he would come home and Vonda would ask him, how's his weekend? Good. She felt really let down. I didn't do anything for her. Forget all the fluff and stuff. It was a good weekend. He has just condensed 2 full days down into 1 word. And he's satisfied. A woman is interested in the minute details of the entire weekend, and anything less just doesn't cut it. Vonda enjoyed when her oldest daughter was dating. They could talk for hours about the weekend. She enjoyed that. I mean, she was so let down when Dustin was dating. It's just good. And what is it? Well, sounds like it was good. Yeah, that's what sounds good to me. If he says it's good, it's good. Consider for the wife. Accept your husband, warts and all. Don't try to change him. Don't try to make him into something or what you think he should be. More than likely, you will try to make him into something he cannot be. You probably will not like what he becomes. Now, I'm not saying that men, we don't need to hear our wives. We don't need to learn from them and grow. But what I'm saying is, to wives, is be careful what you attempt to do, how you attempt to change them. His lack of being observant is very frustrating. But it doesn't mean he's purposely ignoring things. To me, it's extremely frustrating. Vonda says, could you get the crackers in the closet? And I look there blankly. Crackers, 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 crackers. I don't see crackers. And she says, and they're right in front of your nose. Oh, to me, it's frustrating. Communicate clearly. What am I supposed to say, or what is a man supposed to say when you ask, are you planning on wearing that shirt today? And I've tried to learn to say, okay, I'll go change it. Things like that. I remember one time we were in bed and Vonda said, do you think it's hot in here? I said, no, I'm comfortable. Mistake. She gave a big sigh and went and turned the attic fan on. Communicate clearly. Thirdly, you are your husband's greatest vulnerability. It's far easier for a husband to stand up and face the world when he knows his wife loves him, accepts him, and supports him. One of the hardest things for a godly husband to do is go on in life when the one he loves more than anything in the world, at least he feels like, the one who loves him, he loves more than anything, isn't standing with him. He's incredibly vulnerable in times like that. But again, remember what I'm saying. The goal of this, or the foundational assumption, is 2 godly people striving to love the Lord and live for God with all their hearts. For the husband, your differences, how God made you, does not make you less responsible. You need your wife. You need her perspective on relationships, her ability to detect things long before you do. You need her. Secondly, is you're commanded by God to learn to focus on your wife and to strive to understand her. 1 Peter 3 makes it clear. Live with your wives in an understanding way. It goes on to say, remembering they're the weaker vessel. But it closes with an important note, that your prayers be not hindered. Your spiritual vitality depends on you striving to live in an understanding way with your wife. In closing, are men and women different? Yes, they are. Why are they different? God made it that way. When a husband tries to understand how his wife thinks, what she feels, and how she processes what she is experiencing, when a wife tries to understand how her husband thinks, feels, and how he processes what he is experiencing, the result is increased unity in the marriage, and the marriage reflects God's relationship with you. God bless.